Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of AIJAC Live Online. My name is Joel Burney, and it is a pleasure to have you with us this evening. I'd like to flip over directly to Jerusalem to our guest, Ambassador Gold. Hi, Ambassador. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
It's fantastic seeing you tonight in these trying times in Israel. Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone in Israel at the moment, and we're keen to hear an update from you tonight. Now, I'd like to also make a special mention to our Facebook streaming audience to join us shortly, as well as our other international guests joining with us tonight. Very, very short housekeeping, ladies and gentlemen, as usual. An invitation for our next webinar will be in your inboxes shortly, as we're just making the finishing touches on our next guest. So please be on a lookout in your inboxes for that. During these times, ladies and gentlemen, you are in need of accurate and quick information. On our Facebook pages, on our Twitter, Instagram, and our website, we have a lot of up-to-date information for you. So please make sure that you go onto those sites, join those pages if you want up-to-date information on what's currently going on in Israel. As usual, ladies and gentlemen, this evening's webinar will include a moderated Q&A about halfway through. I'll go through the details of how to access the raised hand feature in Zoom a little bit later. Now on to our main event. Ambassador Dore Gold is president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. He served as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations in 1997 to 1999, and as the Director General of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2015 to 2016. In that capacity, he was instrumental in expanding Israel's ties in Africa, the Arab world, and Far East. He has served as an advisor on international issues to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and as an envoy to the Palestinian Authority, Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states. Gold has a BA, MA, and PhD from Columbia University. As a senior diplomat and recognized scholar, Gold is called upon regularly to share his expertise. He delivered testimony to the US House of Representatives special congressional hearings on recognizing Israeli sovereignty on the Golan Heights in 2018, and moving the American embassy to Jerusalem in 2017, and before the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Israel's right to defensible borders in 2011. In 2009, he debated Justice Richard Goldstone on the veracity of the UN fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict. He's written books on the Middle East, including 3 New York Times bestsellers, and his articles appear in major international publications. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's topic is Israel's foreign policy, expanding normalization, and marginalizing delegitimization. I would now like to hand over to AIJAC's Executive Director, Dr. Colin Rubenstein, to say a few words.
Thanks very much, Joel. Welcome everybody to this evening's event with our very good friend and highly distinguished Israeli scholar, public servant, Dr. Dore Gold. This is, as Joel said, as we all know, a very worrying and very precarious juncture in Israel's history. And Dore Gold, I think, knows a little thing or two about not only Israel, but the broader region. And if anyone can try and enlighten us as to the genesis and the nature and maybe the outcome of these troubling events, it's Dr. Dore Gold. Now, obviously, these events are extremely worrisome. We know that, over 1,000 rockets have been fired from Gaza. Even Ben Gurion Airport was shut down for a while. The city of Lod is on fire. Israelis are huddled up in bomb shelters. Call-ups are going on. So it's really on the edge. And we know it's just unconscionable, entirely unacceptable that Israel is bombarded with this barrage of rockets fired from civilian sites indiscriminately towards civilians across Israel, a double war crime. So we want to know why now? What, of course, is going on? Putting the lie to some of the biased media and the temptation to always blame the retaliator here. Lies have long legs, as we know. But now's the chance this evening, to address some of that misinformation. But we want to know also, what are the effects? What are they, first and foremost, on the people of Israel, the safety and well-being and the morale of all Israeli citizens? What will be the impact on efforts to form a government, which are on the cusp of being finalized just 24 hours, 36 hours ago? Where is that going now? What is the future in terms of possible relationships with the Palestinians moving forward? Is that a long day in the distance now, going back to square one? What will be the impact on the much claimed and very positive Abraham Accords? Are they under strain now? Can they be extended? What about the attitude and the role of countries even like Jordan right now, with their interest in Jerusalem, which seems to be somewhat problematic to outsiders? What about the relationship with allies, particularly, of course, with the United States, which commendably, of course, eventually came out and has condemned the rocket attacks on Israel, something we're waiting for others to do, rather than being mired in sort of false moral equivalence between, violence committed on both sides, and please cool down, and no mention of the rockets here, or the precursors to this violence and the causes of this violence. And what about Iran and its proxies, particularly Hezbollah? Are they gaining heart, encouragement from these events that they're partly behind as well, of course? So there are many questions, many more, and ladies and gentlemen, there's no one better than our guest tonight, Dr. Dore Gold, to address them and to enlighten us. Dore, the forum is yours.
Well, thank you. I have only positive memories from my visits to Australia and to my work with AIJAC. And Colin, you've done an amazing job there. Australia is a key power in the Western Alliance, and one that is always reliable. There are many different interpretations to what has gone on here, because there are so many simultaneous factors affecting the calculus of our adversaries. Obviously, the eruption of the violence that we're seeing occurred during the month of Ramadan among the Muslims. And while most Muslims find Ramadan to be a joyous time and one where they have iftar dinners and sweets in the evening, for a small minority, but a very dangerous minority, it's a time when the environment is exploited to initiate what they call jihad. And I think that is also a factor in what is affecting the behavior of young people, young Palestinians who seem to have been recruited for this violence. One of the questions I always ask when I see violence erupting, like the case of let's take Jerusalem as the start of all of this, is it something which is spontaneous? In other words, the population that is revolting just woke up one morning and said, or one evening, I should say, and decided that it was time to go out for its own crusade? Or was this something that was pre-planned? Is this something that was incited and for political purposes? I have to say that the evidence that this is something that was incited and planned is overwhelming and not something spontaneous. One of the most disturbing aspects of what went on in Jerusalem is the evidence that the Palestinian organizations, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, were pre-positioning the implements which they used for the attacks on Israelis and on Jews on the Temple Mount. This is not a new phenomenon. It goes back to the days of the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, when they would store even firearms up on the Temple Mount to be used during times of violence. But that seems to be what has occurred here. And therefore, when the Israeli police had no choice but to go up on the Temple Mount, they found large amounts of rocks and boulders stored, which the Palestinians could use against, first, the Israeli security forces, secondly, against Jews who prayed at the Western Wall just below the Temple Mount. But when you see material stored for the use of violence, you know that this is a pre-planned operation and not something that just spontaneously occurred. Another factor affecting the environment here is something which you mentioned, Iran, and I think Iran shouldn't be put at the end of this discussion, but perhaps even in the beginning. Former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Tony Blair, has a think tank in London, which released a report about what Iran is up to, and particularly its malign activities around the Middle East. And it is a very important report to read. What it says is that while there were expectations that the 2015 Iran deal, the JCPOA, would moderate the environment in the region and would bring about a better Iranian behavior, just the opposite occurred. And many new pro-Iranian organizations were formed and became active in various countries across the Middle East. And it's really in that environment that you've seen a clear-cut escalation of the activities of the Houthis in Yemen, who have been launching rockets at Saudi Arabia, and not at just some desert hill in the empty quarter, but at Riyadh, the capital, and at key parts of Saudi Arabia's petroleum infrastructure. And when you see that kind of behavior occurring and escalating since 2015, it's something that one should pay attention to. Now, the Houthis are not the only pro-Iranian affiliate in the Middle East. And of course, the two that we are most concerned with are Islamic Jihad and Hamas, both of which are Sunni organizations, but that doesn't halt them or stop them from working closely with the regime in Tehran. So in an environment in which we see escalating activities by Iranian proxies in the Middle East, I have to put Hamas's decision to launch a war against Israel into a regional context that is oftentimes ignored. But I think we shouldn't ignore it. I think it's part of what's going on. I also believe that the Hamas, which is the main power here pushing this war, has had two goals which they are trying to achieve in launching violence against Israel. You mentioned the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords was one of the biggest sources of defeat for Hamas and its allies in the Middle East and for Iran. And when all of a sudden you have Israelis coming to Gulf states and speaking about their joint interests, which include dealing with the problem of Iran, that was something which Iran wants to see rolled back, defeated. And as a result, I believe they set as a goal for themselves to break the Abraham Accords. And therefore, I believe that the violence, one of the purposes they've kept in mind is exactly that. And it is something which, of course, is against our interest, but it's actually against the interests of the entire Western Alliance, even though you don't see people voicing concern about that issue. I can tell you this, the Jerusalem Center, which I head, has been developing ties with think tanks in the Gulf, which leads me to get on the phone with their heads quite frequently. And the events of the last, let's say the last week or 10 days, did not lead to suddenly people sounding cold on the other end. They were concerned. They wanted information. And they wanted to know why this is occurring and when it's going to end. But the fundamental interest they have in a warm relationship with Israel continue. But it is under a potential strain should it drag out for weeks or even longer. The other element of, let's call it Arab-Israeli improved relations, which have bothered Hamas and Hamas wants to break, has to do with the internal situation in Israel. Israeli Arabs have become Israelized. They want to be part of Israeli society. And the most powerful example of that was a decision of the head of the southern branch of the Islamic movement to open negotiations with various Israeli parties that were forming a government and to see how they could fit in to these discussions. When you have, for the first time in Israel's history, Arab parties who have decided to choose moderation over extremism, negotiate with mainstream Israeli political forces about how they can become part of the country's political scene, that is huge. And it's something Hamas would like to stop. So clearly that has been one of their goals by sponsoring escalated violence. And it's something which we're very concerned with. Some of the cities and towns where we've seen an explosion of violence, like Lod. Whoever thought Lod is going to have, Lod has an Israeli Arab population. It's a mixed city, but nobody thought there would be mobs running through the city looking to attack its Jewish residents. That's what's happened. And that's of tremendous concern. And that is a success of this Hamas operation, which we have to roll back. I believe that Israel has today one of the best chiefs of staff it's had in its history. But it's going to take a long time to defeat the force we're dealing with. And no one should expect that if today is Wednesday, sometime by Shabbat, this whole thing's going to be over with. It's not. It's going to require a lot of patience on the part of the Israeli public and Israeli governmental officials. But I believe we have special skills that will allow us to prevail. One is a very strong intelligence system. I'm talking about internal intelligence and external intelligence. And what often takes time in these kind of situations is you have to let your intelligence forces operate so they get the latest up-to-date information about where your adversaries are located, who they are, and what has to be done to eliminate the threat they're posing. That's happening as I speak right now. But they're good. You know, some people who get very frustrated in these situations would like to see us take our F-35s and carpet bomb whole sections of the Gaza Strip. That's not what we're going to do, and that's not smart. It's also not moral, and one of the things we should take pride in is that Israel wages these wars with a sense of what are the moral elements of modern warfare, particularly when the other side is completely immoral and uses human shields to protect its highest level officials. So in any case, I think that's a summary of that's a map of what is the problem which we're dealing with. The fact that Mahmoud Abbas is weaker than he's ever been, not that he is a political leader who has any promise, but at least he formally condemned violent attacks against Israel. Obviously, he disappointed everybody who believed that Mahmoud Abbas would reach some kind of accommodation. He's not interested in it. It goes against his doctrines of survival, and you know, he's basically echoing the approaches taken by Hamas today. But in any event, as I said, I think we have the strength, we have the ability, we have the experience to deal with the threat that we are facing. And we need the patience, and we need the support from abroad. There is a desire to try and delegitimize the state of Israel. That's been going on for many, many years, using the block voting at the United Nations to try and adopt resolutions. I call them Flat Earth Society resolutions, but to get us to feel defeated by the opinions that get voiced at the UN. That's not going to happen either. And it's going to take, again, time. It's going to take strength, but we'll get there. And with friends like Australia, we will not feel alone.
Thank you very much for that, Ambassador. I'd now like to open the floor to the audience for Q&A. Just a reminder as to how to access the raised hand feature in Zoom. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there will be a button that says reactions. If you hit on that button, there'll be a raised hand feature, and I'll see that you have an intent to ask. Now, we do prefer if you are able to come on camera and ask your question, but if you are camera shy, as usual, you can place your question in the chat feature and I will ask it on your behalf. First question goes to AIJAC's Dr. Svi Fleischer.
Hi, Dore. The Palestinian narrative on this whole conflict is centered on Sheikh Jarrah and the claim that there are attempts by settlers to throw Palestinian refugees out of their home there. How can we best, both Palestinian advocates are saying it, and a lot of media outlets in Australia at least are echoing that's how this all started. Can you explain a bit more about what's really going on and how we can best address this claim that this is the root of the violence?
Yes, look, the dispute in the area of Sheikh Jarrah is a land dispute that's being adjudicated in our courts. The basic outline of it, and you don't have to be an Ottoman historian to understand this. This territory was purchased by a Jewish land authority before the 1948 war. And the Jews that lived there were thrown out as a consequence of the 1948 war. And a group of Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, moved in, and the state of Israel had to deal with that situation, because the original owners were now turning to the state of Israel saying, hey, wait a minute, this is our territory, here's the deed. And the Arabs living there said, wait a minute, we've moved in since then. So the kind of arrangement that was emerging was an arrangement that recognized that there were these two different claims, and tried to come up with a way of addressing that situation. That is a dispute over land. It's not based on a bunch of right-wing extremists who are trying to take Palestinian land away. The Palestinians were asked to pay rent to the owners, not to get out. And then, of course, this thing was being tossed around for years in our Supreme Court, which finally said this land belongs to the original Jewish owners. Supreme Court, to the best of my recollection, was never part of a Israeli right-wing land movement, but it was something which, happens in countries where there are land disputes, and one shouldn't make more of this than is there. But obviously, this arouses huge emotions. There is a Israeli lawyer, I think his name's Avi Becker, and he's written a really scholarly legal piece on this. And I would just recommend that you read it and summarize it perhaps, and get it out to your various audiences that find this of interest, including the Australian press. But don't make of this something bigger than it is. And don't fall into the trap of those who have set the trap of turning this into this national land struggle, which it has elements of, but it also has legal foundations. It was being adjudicated in our courts. And somehow one has to remove the okets, but remove the how would I put this? Make this less of an issue, which of course everyone is trying to, particularly in the Western press, build up.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. I'd now like to go to AIJAC's Naomi Levine.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It was really interesting to hear from you in the current situation. The Australian government, or Australian Foreign Minister today, released a statement calling, obviously, for an end to the escalation, but also for the resumption of peace negotiations, which seems like a bit of a pipe dream in the current situation. What can Israel's allies, like Australia and others, be doing in a practical sense to help with the de-escalation? Are there measures they can take beyond calling for peace negotiations?
Well, the problem is, we're not in 1993 at the time of the Oslo agreements, when we were on the verge of very hopeful peace negotiations that obviously didn't pan out. But we're in the middle of a war with Hamas, backed by Iran, the Palestinian affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood. And these are not guys that want to cut a deal. So, you can make a ceasefire arrangement, maybe through Egyptian intelligence, then put off the next confrontation for 60 days or 100 days. But you have to have a realistic appraisal of what's going on. And some of the slogans being thrown around in Western capitals about resuming peace negotiations are just not realistic. Even if you're speaking about Mahmoud Abbas alone, okay? You have to remember how that ended last time he was involved in negotiations. In 2014, he made a visit to the White House and met with President Barack Obama. And it was a time when when Secretary of State John Kerry had worked out a deal between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas. The deal was based on, there was an American proposal. You could agree to it, and you could express reservations with certain clauses in the American proposal. With those terms set, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, yes, but I have problems here and there, because he was allowed to do that. They turned to Mahmoud Abbas, and in the Oval Office, he was asked, so what is your position on the American proposal? And Abbas's answer was, I'll get back to you. The problem was, he never got back to anybody. So he was not the kind of peace partner that's oftentimes touted in Brussels or wherever he's hanging out. And, that's why what will resume negotiations has such a ring of lack of realism. I think we should make an effort to come to a new, more realistic model of how we can reach an accommodation. I have ideas. I don't want to talk about them in public, but that accommodation probably should involve some of the Arab states with whom we have peace. And maybe something can be worked out, particularly if you get the Gulf states engaged, because they have the funding and they have the political will to try and put some moderation into this equation of Israeli-Palestinian peace.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. I'd now like to hand over to Gary Hertz.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Missiles have hit Jerusalem, suburbs of Tel Aviv, and of course the low-lying fruit of the south. Do you believe it's likely to continue into Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, or will it just so-called peter off to the south, which has been the past what has occurred?
Well, yesterday we had some very high-profile violent attacks in the heart of Tel Aviv. And, Tel Aviv has cities that ring it, like Hulon, for example, and Bat Yam. And Hulon was badly attacked. A bus was hit directly by a missile launched from the Gaza Strip. So right now, it doesn't seem to be petering out by any means. The other factor is the success of Hamas in mobilizing the Israeli Arab population. So in a place like Lod, you've had mobs moving around, attacking Israeli civilians. Very bad situation. In Jerusalem, there was something which was recorded by video of youngsters throwing rocks at a car. The car veered off the side of the road. It was right near the walls of the old city. And the youth opened the doors and tried to pull out the driver. Now, he was very, very lucky that an Israeli policeman was right there. The policeman drew his sidearm, aimed it directly at those who were trying to lynch the Israelis, and they backed off. But the fact that they're acting in such a brazen way is not a good sign. But I think only by a demonstration of force can we roll this thing back, and a demonstration of force that shouldn't backfire either. It shouldn't lead to the killing of innocent lives on the Palestinian side, but make it clear that Israel will do what's necessary to defend its people.
Thank you again for that, Ambassador. I'd now like to hand over to Anthony Cohen.
Thank you, Ron, for your insights. How do you think this Palestinian uprising is being taken by the people and the leaders, maybe separate entities in Egypt and Jordan?
I think this kind of thing makes them nervous. Years ago, I was an envoy to Egypt, and we had some riots on the Temple Mount. And I felt the most important thing I could do would be to get President Mubarak to put pressure on Mahmoud Abbas to pull the rioters back. So I remember I met in the airport with Osama El-Baz. He was the foreign policy advisor of President Mubarak. And I said to him, Osama, you know, if this thing continues, these riots, you're going to have riots in the mosques in Cairo. And that's not going to be good for you. So it should be your interest in getting this to come to a halt. And I think those, you know, the leaders, the names have changed, but I think the fundamental interest of President Sisi and King Abdullah is exactly that. Are they going to follow through? Is it going to happen? I can't say. It's too early. But we've been in this dance before, and I think they get nervous when intifada-like activities are going on for too long.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'd now like to hand over to Helen Shardy.
I'm now unmuted. Hi, Ambassador, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess I've been following the elections very closely and writing about them. So what do you think all this violence says about the likelihood of a unity government being formed to govern Israel, especially given the failure of Netanyahu to form a coalition?
Well, I could just bring you up to date on the buzz you hear on Israeli television.
Yeah, a lot of buzz.
Well, the buzz points to the fact that there was a press conference last night with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister, Benny Gantz, and they seem to be working in harmony because these are experienced men who understand the importance of the moment. They're not young politicians who are excited by the coming to power very quickly. And we may get new options in terms of the way the next coalition is going to be formed. But I can't look at a crystal ball and say, well, is this going to mean that Netanyahu and Gantz are going to be at the core of the next coalition? I don't know. But these are men of experience and men who both have understood what it means to be a responsible leader.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. I'd now like to hand over to AIJAC's Jamie Hyams.
Thank you very much for that, Joel. Thank you, Ambassador. Now, before all this violence started, Israel seemed to be progressing quite well with the Abraham Accords. The Biden administration was making noise about, supporting them and maybe getting further countries along. I'm just wondering what you think about, whether Israel is on the way to achieving further parties joining the Abraham Accords, and what effect, if any, this violence will have on that process.
Well, I think the violence undercuts the Abraham Accords. It undercuts the chances of more Arab states joining these accords for now. In the future, not necessarily. I think what makes the Abraham Accords so attractive, what made them so attractive, was the strong support from Washington under the Trump administration. And if that support fades, or if the Abraham Accords look like they're sort of dissolving, then you're not going to get new countries to join in. I saw today in the Washington Post, there is a columnist, and I'm going to mispronounce his name, Ishan Tarur, who was talking about the end of the Abraham Accords. But he was doing so with a tone of, in his writing, like good riddance, Abraham Accords. You know, people like that are, if they feel that that's the direction of history, then it'll be very difficult to keep all of this going. Although I really believe that the leadership in countries like Morocco, like the United Arab Emirates, like Bahrain, want the Abraham Accords to continue and to even expand. I think what happens on the ground in the next 2 weeks will play a large role in what direction all of this moves.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll now hand over to Aaron Shapiro.
Yeah, hi, Dore. I had a question about changes that we've been seeing in the United States for some time. I know from your ambassador experience, understanding diplomatic trends, and you saw the New York mayor candidate getting a lot of criticism for supporting Israel right now. And you know, I grew up in New York, and we've come a long way to have a mayor candidate actually get heat for supporting Israel. So, and we know about undercurrents in the Democratic Party, AOC, Ilhan Omar, and others. How concerned are you with a trend in the U.S., especially in the Democratic Party and on its left flank, that's and it's changing views towards Israel?
Well, in the short term, I am very concerned, but you know, I know President Biden, I know the Secretary of State, and they're people who are fundamentally friendly to the state of Israel. There are nuances when something comes up, and you know, they have to take a position. I'd prefer to get a stronger position on some issues, but I think they're fundamentally in our corner. And I think what is required, you know, to use Hasbara, PR, to use PR to get South Africa or Algeria to change their positions is totally unrealistic. But to use PR, to use Hasbara, to help build support among those who fundamentally want to help you, but they don't have the information, I think is something we should be doing.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll now like to hand over to Colin, who has a question.
Thanks very much, Dore. I just want to look bigger picture, and you promoted in the batting order Iran, which I think is, of course, very astute of you, and indeed I agree with. But in terms of what's happening in Vienna and what's happening in terms of the apparent determination of the US administration, friendly in many respects and supportive of Israel, as you pointed out, nonetheless has a lot of B-grade Obama people in the team, all of whom are keen to get back into the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. I mean, the negotiations aren't smooth sailing, but still the trend is towards rejoining that deal and bit by bit, seemingly caving into Iranian demands. Is that a fair reading of the situation, and what can be done to try and focus the US administration on stiffening its resolve and playing a better hand here, because clearly in the whole scheme of things, this is a huge problem for Israel and of course all of its Arab allies as well. It's a major concern.
Well, I think we have to really shore up American support for fundamentals of the old JCPA and the new one that'll be negotiated. When I say that, there were all these assumptions, as I think I might have hinted earlier, that a new nuclear accord will lead to more moderation. Really, I think there has to be an effort to lay out what is expected of Iranian behavior after the accord is reached. For example, no one even thought that Iran was going to be active in the area of Morocco and the Western Sahara. They have been. They used their embassy in Algeria to bring in Hezbollah activists who would train the Western Sahara operatives. And this was something that was so unacceptable to the Moroccan government that Morocco ultimately, after delivering an ultimatum, broke diplomatic relations with Iran. So is that going to continue, or is that going to be halted? The expansion of Iranian activity in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, all this has to be put on in a booklet by the US government and saying, are you going to continue with this, or are you going to halt it? And hopefully the Iranians will understand that they can't continue the same behavioral patterns they have had up until recently. But they have to be confronted with what they have been up to. And I would hope American negotiators will do precisely that.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll now go to Alex Goodman.
Hi, Dore. Am I unmuted, Joel?
No, you're all good, mate.
Okay. Hi, Dore. Thank you very much for that. My question is, do you think that the recent Human Rights Watch report that labelled Israel an apartheid state will have much effect on Israel's international standing? And how do you think Israel can best respond to that? And just added on to that, what's your latest prognosis on the International Criminal Court proceedings?
Well, let's start with the attempt to reassert the idea that Israel's an apartheid state. When I was Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I took Israeli teams to South Africa. I met with South African diplomats, and it was pretty clear to me that whatever reservations they had with Israel, it wasn't that they saw Israel as an apartheid country. But it would be helpful, and actually organizations like AIJAC or think tanks could engage in this activity. If you did a joint seminar, let's say, in Melbourne or in Sydney with South African Blacks who are intellectuals and who rejected the analogy about Israel being an apartheid country, and it got some coverage in the Australian press, you could jostle the efforts to stick a apartheid label to the state of Israel. So I think that's something that should be done. Now, the second question you had to do with not apartheid, the ICC. And here you get into the whole question of whether, particularly because this is the heart of what the Palestinians are going to try and do, they're going to try and define settlement activity as a war crime. And it is extremely important to disabuse any court of that, but also to point out where real war crimes that are associated with the same legal arguments made against the Israeli settlements are being ignored. Just to give you one example, you know, the whole accusation that Israel is engaged in a war crime with its settlement activity over the years is rooted in an interpretation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which certainly doesn't allow an occupying power to take the residents of an occupied territory and push them out. But the interpretation brought into the Fourth Geneva Convention also prohibits bringing your own residents into territory that has been captured in a war and have them live there and reside there and take over properties there. Okay, I understand that. That is the interpretation accepted in Geneva by those who manage the Fourth Geneva Convention. But what happens when that starts occurring all around the world and that's ignored? So for example, one of the things that I would say makes my blood boil is when I see pro-Iranian militias operating in Syria, kicking out Sunni Arabs who end up moving to Europe, and their homes are taken over by pro-Iranian, pro-Shiite forces. That's exactly what the Fourth Geneva Convention was designed to avert, and yet nobody's doing anything about it. So I think that the international human rights community has to be confronted with those cases and has to be exposed. And perhaps with a concerted effort in that area, we can change the environment of the legal world when it's used to move against the state of Israel. And I think that will have an effect on the ICC.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I'm going to quickly try and link three geographically similar places and try and link them together for some quick fire question and answers before we hit the 60-minute mark. How important are Israel's improving relations with Greece and Cyprus is the first. Second is, how do you see Israel's negotiations with Lebanon over their maritime boundaries across the gas fields developing, and might they lead to anything further? And thirdly, where does Turkey fit into all of this?
So let me start with Greece and Cyprus. I think they are real allies of Israel. You know, what has happened, we've had very complicated relations with the European Union, I would say, over the last 20 years. And, you know, the European Union operates through consensus, so that if there is an initiative by a country like Belgium to have Israel condemned in a European Union forum, if 2 or 3 countries in the European Union go, no, we're not going along with this, this is not acceptable to us, then the draft resolution or whatever form it comes in falls away. So that's why having 2 allies in the European Union will stand by Israel so strongly is so important. Plus, Greece and Cyprus are 2 countries that have an interest in how our gas resources grow and how they're developed. So I think that these are very important countries for our future relations. And I think we have to work on those countries and make sure that those relationships grow and not contract. Turkey. Turkey under Erdogan has been a problematic neighbor. It has moved from being the Turkey of the past, which was a critical ally of Israel, to a country which works closely with Islamist organizations, including Hamas. When I was in the foreign ministry, we received information that Hamas was training cells in Istanbul. And that was shocking, but it was true. And as a result, Aruri, one of the chief leaders of the Hamas organization, was kicked out of Turkey. And he moved to Qatar, later to Lebanon. I would hope that Turkey is going to make a strategic choice in the months ahead. It's basically thrown the dice on better relations with the Islamist currents in the Middle East. And its economy has gone into, excuse my French, into the garbage can as a result. If President Erdogan wants to pull Turkey out of its current situation, he's going to have to join the Western powers in terms of how he acts on such critical issues as international terrorism. He might not view Hamas as terrorism, but the whole world international community does. So I think we might have a shot at a better relationship with the Turks. Hopefully we'll find a quiet way of moving in that direction and obtaining a new and better relationship with Turkey. I want to say on a strategic level, since Iran is the primary threat to Israel, having Turkey in our corner and supporting Israel would be a better result than losing Turkey and having Turkey assume an increasingly hostile position.
Quick word on Lebanon.
I don't have the facts on how those negotiations are going.
Fair enough. I've got Colin's hand up again. Colin, for a follow-up. We'll just unmute you, Colin. Stand by.
Right.
There you go.
Just want to follow up, Dore. Firstly, Iran is a huge problem, but its proxy Hezbollah, of course, we know what it can get up to, and it would be taking heart from the current developments. How effectively is Israel containing and deterring, both the supply to Hezbollah and Hezbollah's likelihood of joining in the fray? That's one. And the second one is, I have to say that we're very pleased that the Australian government and Prime Minister Morrison last week announced that Australia would have no part of Durban 4 taking place in New York in September, as you well know, following on the very acceptable decision of the United States, with Canada following on from Australia. It's very important that other countries follow suit, but I wonder if you could comment on the importance of them doing so and the danger that this Durban 4 may get a bit more oxygen in the light of current developments, and therefore the need to stand up and repudiate what's at the base of that gathering.
Well, absolutely. I think that the Australian move on Durban 4 is very important for Israel at this time. And I don't have much more to add to that, except that there'll be an effort, presumably if this conflict with Hamas continues over time, there'll be an effort to portray Israel's military moves as war crimes and Hamas's military moves as self-defense. And that's a complete lie. It's exactly the opposite. But it's very important that, first of all, we get our story out. And number two, that these efforts to put us in that category are fully defeated. Hezbollah, I'm glad you mentioned it. I think one of the dangers of the current situation is that Hezbollah will say to itself, well, maybe we should just join in the fray. And let's open up a second front in the north. That would be a bad situation for the state of Israel. It would be one we could take care of, but we have to make sure that Hezbollah is fully deterred. And I'm sure the state of Israel has been working on that for a while.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'd now like to hand over to AIJAC's Jeremy Jones for the final question.
Thank you, Ambassador Gold. I bring you back to where we started tonight, which is the current situation in Israel. Many of us have family there, friends. We're watching it very closely. Concerned for everybody, not just for our families, but anyone caught up in this conflict in any way. And I was just wondering if you could leave us with any causes for optimism, and if there are causes for optimism to which we can contribute somehow, if there is a way we can contribute to a better future generally, we'd very much appreciate it.
Well, I think the Abraham Accords were a great breakthrough. And I think if I have any causes for optimism, it's in that area. Anything that Australia does to promote the Abraham Accords would be highly appreciated. It would be highly appreciated by the state of Israel and its supporters. That's the best I can say at this point in terms of sources for optimism. It's hard to be optimistic when you have fires breaking out in Israeli cities from Hamas missiles. But I think that if we can continue with our new and better relations with the Gulf states, perhaps with the support of Australia and any allies it suggests we bring in, that could lead us into a much better reality in the future.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. And on that note, on behalf of AIJAC, thank you so much for your webinar tonight. We appreciate the time that you've been able to give us tonight during testing times in Israel. We greatly appreciate it, as does the audience. And on behalf of AIJAC, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for. As I said at the top of the webinar, if you would like some information, real-time information, please head to our Facebook page, our website, our Twitter page, or our Instagram. We have accurate information pretty much on the hour during business hours. So if you need timely information, please head to our channels. You'll also receive an invitation for our next webinar shortly. So be on the lookout for an invitation then. Chag Shavuot Sameach, Am Yisrael Chai. Please everyone be safe, and we will see you next time.